Kushal, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Victor. Nice to be here.
I'm excited to have you on. You have a very intriguing story that I know we're going to get into in just a second. As my listeners know, I like to get right into things and start diving deep. So let's talk about before we get into all the other good stuff. What's your story? How did you get into what you're doing? What inspired you? What was the journey? And so much more.
Sure. The whole journey started as me coming as an ambitious immigrant to this country for education. And right after that, I really wanted to work on Wall Street. And, one should be really careful what they ask for because it might be given, right, as they say. And so I started working at Goldman Sachs in a very high pressure environment. But I was loving it. I was kind of chasing that proverbial American dream, if you will. And I was so sucked into it that at some point of time, I'd forgotten to ask myself why I was doing what I was really doing. It just felt right in that moment. And it was 20 years ago on 9/11, I had a miraculous escape from the burning towers. And that kind of shook me up. It waked me up from my reverie and kind of made me think that there had to be more to life than what met the eye. There had to be something more than chasing big bonuses and perhaps driving fast cars. And what was it? Why was I? What was I really doing here, anyways? What was my purpose? And I experienced a void that I had not felt before. Sometimes you see death from so up close and personal. It kind of creates a very surreal feeling inside. And that's what I experienced. But I didn't know how to fill that void. I tried doing things that I would not otherwise do because there was this interesting, mix of feelings within me, or part of me felt I had to go and achieve everything and finish the unfinished business. But on the other side, there was like, but then what's the point of it? It could end any moment. And do I really need to do that? So I kind of tried to do a few things, but they proved to be mere distractions, traveling the world, exploring some other hobbies and interests. And, but they were just distractions. I kept coming back to that feeling of something is missing, something is lacking. And around that time, I met this spiritual master coming from India, Gurudev Shri Ravi Shankar. And through his teachings, I learned some very powerful breath work and meditation. Sky breath. And I'm talking about 2004, back in the days when there were no smartphones or, not enough awareness about yoga, meditations, or breath work, not enough influencers like yourselves talking about it, And so I was like, is this the right thing? I was very, being a very left brain, scientific, proof-seeking person, I was like, does this thing really work, or is it just some, of course, my roots are in Eastern spirituality, but I wanted proof for everything first. I wanted a scientific validation, if you will, before jumping in. So I was very measured in my approach in going after it or accepting it on its face value in the first go. But as I kept practicing it, it just completely felt like a piece of that missing piece of puzzle had just fallen into place, and that completely transformed my life, if I may say. And it gave me it brought back that enthusiasm in the life. It gave me the ability to really follow my heart, gave me that strength and courage to not take life too seriously and do whatever I want. And following that, I left my promising Wall Street job to join a startup and go travel and go to Asia to work, come back and do another startup. I've done 3 startups since. And one of the things, I had this wrong notion in my head before I signed up for my first meditation class was probably meditation is anti-ambition, that perhaps it requires me to give up all my, my desires and my what I want to achieve from my life. I was in my 20s, right? So and become a monk. But then I realized that no, it didn't have to be that. It's not about it. You could be in the world, experience everything, enjoy it to the fullest, and yet be, yet be a little remote from it, so that, like how you talk about it, look at life as a game, and that brings the best out of oneself, and that's what I experienced. It allowed me to kind of take charge of my life and move on with that joy and being in the moment. We read about all these things that live life in the moment, but it was the first time, and I experienced what is it to be in the moment. And so that's my last 20 years of journey in 2 minutes. But I'm willing to talk more about it, uh, from there.
I love that. Yeah, I know it's they always teach you in business, right? Be not emotionally attached to your business, because if you are, it's not going to thrive. And it's funny because I'm a very passionate individual, and it's like, I know when I first started in my business, I was like, no, this is a vision, it's a purpose, this is what I'm doing here, and that's all good stuff, and you need that. But it was like, I wanted it to be a certain way, and it had to be a certain way, and I had this emotional attachment to it. And then eventually I learned, like, I got to let that disconnect. That's the business is a product of me, but it's not me. It's, and all those kind of things. So you had death knocking at your door, right? And that shook your world a little bit, would you say? The whole 9/11 shook the whole world on that happening. I remember I was a senior in high school, and literally I was at school and they put on the TV and I'm seeing a plane hit a tower, number 2. And I'm like, am I living in an illusion right now? Like, is this really happening? What was some of the things that, because you go through something like that, I've had people on here who've had like stage 4 cancer, 2 months to live, and they turned their life around, and like, again, death knocking at your door, and how they radically changed their life. What was some of the things, if you don't mind sharing, when it came to that process? Like, when your world was shook, your identity, and I always tell people, when your world gets shaken up, it's really the programming of the mind, the ego, of what it has been conditioned to see how life is, that identity. And then when the identity gets shaken up, ego doesn't like that. So then there's all these emotions that fire in. What was that experience for you, going through that shift?
Yeah. It was a very interesting kind of cocktail of emotions, if I may say, right? In the very initial period, initial time, I really didn't know what was happening. It all happened so suddenly. It all happened so fast. The rapid succession of events, that it kind of left me dazed. I like how you said, I really couldn't tell whether I was this part of some movie scene, or like this kind of stuff you only see on the screen, right? It really doesn't happen where you see, you look up and a plane comes and hits a building. So I was like, is this really happening, or is this a dream, or dream within a dream? What is it really happening? So that kind of left me in that really tender state of disinterest. Like, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't make sense. What is it? I don't know. Just nothing makes sense kind of stage. And there was also this stage where people would ask me, you came out, just tell me, and I would not want to go there. So I was in that state of denial, that, something like that, I would just cut that story short. I said, yeah, this happened, and I just ran out, and that's it. Even today, not many people, some of my really close friends who I've met since, they don't really know much about it. Perhaps some of them who would listen to this thing and say, oh, really? and so I was like very guarded about it for a long time. I just, it's a tendency of mine that it goes back to its comfort zone. It retrieves back. And for me, it was just, going inside. I just pulled myself in. I didn't even talk to my wife much about it, but there's this science of impressions in the mind, right? That every time any event that passes through, it leaves a certain impression, and like a lesion on your nervous system. And every time I would hear a loud noise, a construction truck dropping like something, a steel girder, like this loud noise, or that smell of something burning, it would take me back to that moment. It would those impressions had created some patterns, and it would not allow me to escape those patterns. So that was the start, the initial part where I was trying to make sense of it, and in that process, I just completely, retrieved everything to myself. I just, kept to myself. And then, as I briefly alluded to earlier, came this whole sentiment that, listen, I just have a new life now, and everything that I wanted to do, I had to do it. I had to travel. I had to experience the best food everywhere. I had to change the career, experience a thrill. So, from the professional life, I had to become very successful at what I was doing at work. It was just that artificially created sense of urgency to just finish everything very quickly, because then there was like, but what if something like this happened again and I wasn't so lucky? So that was an interesting conflict raging at the, at the plateau of my wits, where there was like, at one point of time, there was like, what's the point? What is this all about? But then second, at the other end was this another part saying, no, but you got to do this. You have to experience that. You just got a new life. You haven't even tried this. So, it was an interesting kind of contradiction that I continued to persist for a long time.
That's what I was curious about. Yeah. And so because, it's kind of like a form of, would you say it was like a form of like PTSD, right? You heard the clank and it's like, wait a minute. And it just takes you right back to that moment.
Yeah.
How was then your journey with meditation and breath work? How did that help that former memory?
So what the sky breath that I learned, it does is, through the action of your own breath, through the rhythm of your own breath, it cleanses these impressions. So you brought it, that PTSD word, right? I was in denial. Maybe it was, who knows what it was? I never went to a counselor, but the telltale symptoms were like that, right? But I was in denial. I'm like, me, and no, it can't happen to me. I'm just, this was just an event. But deep within, that impression was formed, that pattern was formed. And so it kept taking my mind to that past. And that's a nature of mind, right? We are in life, whatever we do creates these impressions, creates this scars on the nervous system. And simple thing like having coffee. You want a coffee first day, you love it. Next day you want it, you go for it. Third day you want it. It creates a habit, and then now the fifth day you don't have coffee, and it gives you a headache. Right? It's a simple form of what these events leaving an impression on our mind, and it gives your mind it doesn't let your mind be in the moment. We are not even aware of it, but that's what the outcome is. So what I learned with this breath work is, it started removing or scrubbing off these impressions. Of course, that memory is still there. Perhaps it'll live with me for the rest of my life. But it started loosening its charge on me. It started loosening its grip on me, where it stopped driving my life, versus I felt like a lot more in control.
I like that. And I know how that feels, because I've used breath work many types and in meditations. And I love how you brought that up. It took the charge away, right? That emotional charge, that emotional attachment to it. And instead it becomes more, instead of like, this is what happened to me, oh my goodness. Instead it's more like, this is what happened. But now you're like, it's fine. You look at it from a higher plane or a spiritual plane, and you can take it and go, well, what do I want to make that happen for me now? Do I want to learn? What can I extrapolate from that? I can make that either negatively affect my life, or I can make that empower my life. And exactly. Then did you get to that point to where you're like, you look back at the story now, and it's like you're going to remember that for the rest of your life, most likely. Because there's things like, my dark night of the souls and things that I've experienced, I will never forget those things, but right. They don't hold the charge, like you said, on me anymore. I look back and it's like, cool, that happened. This is what I went through. But guess what now? I can use that and help me grow and evolve and learn from it and so much more. So you've done a lot of breath work. I love how you say it scrubs things down a little bit. I try to tell people that all the time. They're like, what do you mean? I'm like, breath work is very powerful. Yeah. I know you do sky breath work. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because on my podcast, I've talked a lot about different breath works. I've had the creator of Soma technique out here on my podcast. I've I practiced Wim Hof probably for 8 years on and off. I've done holotropic. I've done conscious breath. I did a lot of pranayamas and Kundalini yoga. So I have a very extensive knowledge of breath work, but sky is something I haven't heard before. So I'd love, if you don't mind, just break it down. You could share a little bit of that.
Sure. It's predicated on a very simple but profound understanding that the mind is intricately related to your breath. Like any emotion that you experience, let's say you're angry, your breath changes in the most imperceptible way. You're not even aware of it, but one starts breathing short and shallow, right? Or somebody's in grief, and then the breath starts, softening down. There's a larger exhalation, longer exhalation. So usually the mind leads, and the breath follows, right? So emotions lead, and the breath just follows behind it. But if you turn that around, you learn to modulate your breath in a certain way, then the mind has no choice but to follow. And so Sudarshan Kriya is, or the sky, the Sanskrit word is Sudarshan Kriya. It's made of two words, Su and Darshan. Su is proper, Darshan is vision, Kriya is just a purifying action. So through the action of your own breath, it gives you the vision of who you are. Through the action of your own breath, by learning to modulate your own breath, you control your mind. And and like you, I've tried so many breath works and so many different modalities of your meditations, and everything I really, one thing I failed or struggled with, I should say, is with effort. That, everything felt like an effort where I had to do something or not, or resist something to meditate, whether to resist a thought or to focus on a sound or a ray of light or something. All that felt at the level of mind, some kind of effort. But what I learned with Sky is just through breath work, just by breathing in a certain rhythm, it took my mind to a certain place where it effortlessly sank into meditation. So there was no real effort required to meditate. And I love that, because for life of me, I could not meditate before that. And this is the first time, just by this few minutes of rhythmic breathing, I fell into that space. They say that there are 7 layers to our being, right? There's body, breath, mind, intellect, memory, ego, and then the self. And so what Sky does is it navigates through all these different layers, aligns it, maintains them in the rhythm. We feel stress, we feel out of whack when all these 7 layers go out of rhythm. So what Sky does, it aligns them and gives you a little dip into that self, who we really are. And when I experienced that, I was like, this is magic. This is pure magic. So
there's no drugs needed, right?
No drugs needed.
No drugs needed. That's why I try to tell people.
It's a different type of high.
It is, and it's like, I'm a big fan of meditation. It has changed my life in so many ways. But when I work with people in my coaching business or in my chiropractic one, I always recommend breath work. And they're like, what do you mean breath work? I'm like, listen, you're stressed. There's a lot going on, a lot of stimulation, blah, 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 it's affecting the nervous system. I'm like, I go breath work. The beauty why I'm recommending it is because in order to meditate and kind of get a grasp of the power, it's going to take you about 90 days. My experience has been about 90 days. The first month, you're going to hate it. You've experienced it. You got all the thoughts flying through. You can't really focus. The second month, you may be starting to feel like you get a grip, but not too well. But then the third month, you're like, oh, this is what meditation is. Interesting. So I don't have to worry. My thoughts are always there. What I love about breath work is 1 to 2 weeks you're there. Like I know you said, like you get that feeling, and then it's like, yeah, you're centered. And I know you're a left brain type individual. I'm a left brain type individual, although I am very big right brain too, like intuition and spirituality and all that good stuff. But I like to tie it with the left just so that I can share it with people in a way. But like when we talk about the breath, how it changes the tone of our nervous system, there's actually a part of the brain they found out a couple of years ago that is something what they call the breath pacemaker. And what this does is this part of the brain, it's in the medulla, in the part of the brainstem. What it will do is it's always constantly monitoring your breath and seeing where things are. And then it puts that tone on the nervous system. So this is like why Wim Hof can say, well, we can change our autonomic nervous system and influence it. This is one of the, or sky breath or holotropic. You can influence that because when you change your breath and all that, whether you're angry, frustrated, doesn't matter. You can change your breath and stop that immediately because it's the rhythm of our breath. Sometimes some people are asking the question now, is the emotions leading of the breath, or is the emotion in the thought trigger the breath to change and then the feelings of the body follow? That we haven't figured out yet. But there's hypotheticals that say, is the breath that powerful to where it gives us that experience? But I think it's just, you have the thought, you have the reaction, and the breath follows. But it's kind of one of those things where we can drastically change yourself in that process. And I love you sharing that and so much more. I'm gonna have to check out a little bit more on sky breath and see what that breath work and see what that's all about.
And like you said, for me, like, I always fall back to scientific validation at the end of the day. Of course, your experience will say something. You'll have an irrefutable experience that you may not need to go there at all. I mean, I feel what I feel. Like, I feel happy without a reason. What price can you put to it? But I still want to see, what is the underpinnings of all that, right? And so, there was a recent study done by Yale and Harvard, I think. They extensively studied sky and all the other modalities of breath. And, what there was that research and something else also. What came out of it is, it also leads to the vagal stimulation, the stimulation of the vagus nerve. And that is also scientifically proven to kind of, balance your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems and, all that good stuff that follows from there, being in the present moment and all that. So I'm a big believer in science, and I feel that, when your experience is supported by scientific validation, it's just the most beautiful, it's just the most, then I don't need to look back.
No, I agree with you more, because if you have that, like for me, I'm the why type, where it's like, okay, this is giving me that experience. Now I want to know why that does.
Exactly.
Like what's that? What's the thing that's making that happen? Yeah, vagus nerve is it's almost 90% of your parasympathetic nervous system overall. So it's very, very powerful. I love that. How much was it then influential for you? Because I had multiple spiritual teachers. My background, as I said, I'm a chiropractor, but I've also had, I am a Reiki master and trainer. When I was in chiropractic school, I learned that. I learned energy medicine. I mean, it wasn't in school, it was outside, but I studied a lot of the energy medicine principles. I studied a variety of things, and I had spiritual teachers guide me along the way, and it was very monumental for me. How much was your spiritual teacher monumental for you in your journey, your process, your story, and everything?
Well, truth be told, and I hope I don't get quoted on this, I was really averse to having a spiritual teacher to begin with. I was resisting having a master. I don't know why. Perhaps it was my conditioning, having grown up in India and having seen a lot of people taking, supple minds advantage, or I don't know what it was. For some reason, I always had a negative connotation with having a spiritual guide or teacher. But then I realized that you can't learn these things by reading a book. If I gave you a book of Yoga Sutras by Patanjali, and say, okay, now go and master the art of yoga, it's impossible. You need someone who has gone through this and mastered it to show you the ropes. And another thing I learned was, or realized, was that I had no problems having a teacher to teach me math, or to teach me, computers, or to teach me a sport, a coach to learn a sport. But then why was this resistance for, having a teacher who could help you navigate through the maze of your own mind, which is so much far more complex than adding two numbers, and so it was not so much of doing, it was happening that along as I come. Of course, the breath work was very powerful, and it had me right there. As I learned, I continued to practice more. more of what my teacher was saying started making sense. More of what he was doing immediately started creating within me that acceptance, and beyond acceptance, that complete, okay, no, this is it. This person has something that I want. And of course I was questioning, I was doubting, but I kept moving towards it. And it came a point in time, and I said, no, this is it. Of course, my teacher's name is Gurudev Sri Sri Ravi Shankar. And his ways of teaching are very simple, and that's what appealed to me. And so, yes, to answer to your question, it has made a monumental difference in my progress. Would I have learned without a teacher? Would I have learned these things? Yes. Unfortunately, there are no barometers or gauges that can measure your progress on the spiritual path. That, hey, you've come halfway, you've come 2/3 of the way. But do I feel that my progress would have been slower without a master? Oh, yes. And it's just having like a rocket booster that just takes you out of the minutiae and show you the right technique, rather than let you waste your time in figuring out things, because there's so much knowledge and so much incorrect knowledge also out there, right? It's so
I love how you brought that up with I had no problem having a math teacher or a computer teacher or XYZ. So why am I fighting that? That's a good one. I like that. I may have to use that. Because one of my analogies in life, and this is what coaches always say, and I've always had a coach in every aspect of my life. Because again, it's what you said before. It's like a rocket booster, right? I want to get to, like, I just hired another new coach, and I'm like, and they're asking me like, what's your purpose of why? I go, I can learn and do everything that you guys are going to teach me. I can do it on my own. I already have the principles in my head. I don't want to have to spend years, 1, 2, 3, 4 years to try to figure all that out. I'll hire you. I don't care what the money is. I'm going to get it back. And I'm like, and I just want to be able to get there within a year if we can do that. And like, oh, you can do it in 6 months. I'm like, okay, fine, deal. That's why I'm hiring you. But it's one of those concepts, right? In getting in, even with spirituality, I had a couple spiritual teachers who guided me along the way, and it was always interesting because they were so more way advanced in what they did. And I was like, okay, how do you get there? And they're like, well, hold up, it's your journey. Like my one spiritual teacher always used to tell me, you know a lot. That's great. You have a lot of knowledge in you. You studied so many things. You read so many books. She goes, here's the thing, though. You need experience. She's like, experience and knowledge actually creates wisdom. And beautiful. I fought her on that for a little bit. Now I look back and I'm like, shit, she was right. I go, because now in my life, I still learn. I still read. I read way less than I used to, because it's more about like, what do I need at this time, rather than I need to study everything that's out there. Yeah. And I let the experiences guide me now. And it's amazing how much more I learn now than I was before doing what I did.
And there's always what a teacher gives you is it becomes a companion with you and that's what my experience is, right? That somebody who's not interested in anything from you, he doesn't need anything from you, or she doesn't need anything from you, but he's just unconditionally invested in your progress. And I was like, is that even really possible in times like this today? And when I experienced that, I was like, yes, this is something not only I'm benefiting from, but it creates a possibility for me it shows me a human possibility for me to become something like that, to perhaps pay it forward or be there for someone unconditionally, like how he's modeling it for me. So it's been a beautiful ride.
I love that. I love that. And it's hard to find that. I mean, nowadays there's, it's not always like that. But there's that aspect of, I call it doing things old school. Old school was, you learn something, you learn your way, you grind, you get to the point where you're successful in it. And then when you get to a certain point in age and time and everything, now you help the other ones who are just starting where you were, grab a hand, lift them up, and help them in their journey. Exactly. And I learned that from the Jewish community, because that's what they do. They help each other fund someone for their business. And then the requirement is, listen, you don't have to pay us back. But when your time comes and you're successful, the next person that comes, that's on you. And you need to help them rise up and help them.
Beautiful.
I love that. I'm trying to think here. So you have, we talked about your story with 9/11. We got into some breath work and things like that. We talked about the importance of having a spiritual master. What would you say with your spiritual master was one of the things that was the most aha moment for you? What was that like big shift for you? That if there was one thing, I mean, there's probably multitude, which I know, but what is the one thing that took you back and was like, wow, it just turned the light bulb inside you?
I think you're right. There were a few things. There were many things. Um, but I think one of the things that helped me personally move forward, and that I learned from my master, was this art of acceptance. I really had, and that played in so many facets of my life, on my entrepreneurial journey, on dealing with this whole past experiences, in my relationships, at work, in everywhere. The one theme that kept coming up where I struggled because of my conditioning was lack of acceptance. That I thought I had to be in control and fix everything and put self effort to and only self effort to kind of to take charge of the situation. But what I learned was that balance of putting an effort and letting go. There's this oftentimes we go, or let me talk about myself. I would go from one end of the spectrum to the other, sometimes just relying too much on the effort, sometimes just saying I give up. But that balance of just putting enough effort and knowing when to let go and kind of rest in that point, and be in that moment of acceptance to let universe take over from there, is something I learned. And that's a gift, Victor, that keeps on giving. That's something that I would not trade it for anything, because it has given me so much strength and really that feeling of to move on with anything that comes my way. I nothing that comes my way can faze me anymore, because I have that tool in my bag.
I love that's a very powerful tool to have, if I must say. Even question then, with the pandemic, everything that goes on, how does a tool like that, how did it help you navigate through the pandemic and everything?
I think there were a couple of instances, throughout the pandemic. I actually, I enjoy. If I may say, I enjoyed most part of the pandemic. It gave me an opportunity to stop and breathe, and kind of take a pause from a busy life and just go back to taking stock of my life. And of course, a lot of things were happening, and I was having struggles with my startups and all that. But it was this ability, this wanting, this kind of acceptance that just gave me that little, okay, yeah, it's life is a game, it's happening, and just be with it. But what really kind of threw me off towards the end is, I lost my father to COVID, and it was the most difficult situation I'd faced ever in my life, and that whole experience of what had happened 20 years ago, that feeling of disinterest, that feeling of what's the point of all this, that came back again. That void started showing up again, but again, this time it had a different texture. I was in a much different stage in my life. I was in my ability to handle that, I personally felt, was very different. And so it gave me the ability to sail through it. Although it was excruciatingly painful, I to some extent, I was surprised with my own self, how I was able to navigate through it. But now that I look back, that's where I see the difference between how I handled a situation 20 years ago to how I handled the pandemic and what ensued at the end of the pandemic.
Sorry to hear about your dad passing with COVID. how much did you feel then, that difference, seeing that difference, that spiritual growth or just growth in general? How'd that make you feel knowing that here you go, 9/11, went through that experience, then you have the whole pandemic, and your dad ends up becoming one of the individuals who gets affected by this, and seeing how you reacted differently in that place. Did you have like a sense where you look back and you're like, wow, yeah, this stuff works. This is amazing. Look at this. I mean, what was that self-talk? Because I know for myself, when I do reflections like this, and I'm like, man, 10 years ago, if I look at some situation and then I go through something similar, and I'm like, wow, I am like, this is not the same person. And I get like, there's a side of an excitement in me, because it's like, wow, okay, I'm really growing. Because sometimes I don't take the time to do that. If you don't mind sharing.
Yeah, it's, of course, when some big events like this happen, it forces you to take to pause and take stock, if you will, right? It compare things. But we always, when we take a little deeper dive into this realm of wanting to know more than what meets the eye, we always come across this saying again and again, that let's look at life as a game. Look at life as something that's happening. The more you do it, the better off you are. And it's a beautiful concept, right? Until a sledgehammer hits you in the head. And in that moment, when you need all this wisdom and all this knowledge the most, it flees you. You feel like, what is the point? Like, what game? I just lost the most meaningful relationship of my life. You're trying to tell me this life is a game? What part of and you see me having fun here? What part of it? Right? So having an intellectual concept is one thing, and then when to be able to live it, to be able to own it when you're actually going through a difficult situation is an entirely different thing. And no amount of effort or no amount of reading or no amount of learning, I think, can help you get there. I feel to me, I felt that it was this practicing of this breath work, that meditation. It had created that's a resilience in me, that instead of doing or putting an effort to see life as a game, it just kind of a happening. It was just I was able to go through it without getting knocked around, without having to put a lot of conscious effort in it. So, a me from 20 years ago would have tried to do a lot of things to fix it. But here in this case, I was just moving through it, and just kind of, sometimes you see, becoming a witness to all. It was, and not by putting a very forced effort into it. It was a beautiful happening around me. And that's when I realized that, something must be working here.
And I appreciate you sharing that, because like I remember when COVID was first starting, we were kind of like a couple months before letting our patients know, hey, trying to what would come with the stress and the lockdowns and what we need to focus on, like mental health and all these other things. And there was potential of we may have to shut down the business, just depending on how the ruling or what the governor was going to state for the state. And my wife looks at me and she's like, why are you so calm about this? She's like, may have to shut down the business. And you're like, not even phased. Like, you have no worry in your mind. Are you just faking it? Or is that like you just really calm? I said, honey, I've been meditating for over 15 years. I've been practicing breathwork for 9 years. It's all going to be fine. Like, it's all going to work out. It's actually, these things are more of a blessing in life than they're not. And she's like, how the heck? And so with my coaching clients, same thing. What's the message I'm sharing with them? This is going to be the one. You're going to have other opportunities, but this is a huge opportunity to either really blow up your life and all that you do, or just let this be the negative and affect you. And it's amazing, because a lot of the people I coached, and I say all, 100% of them, they all had huge growth during this. I mean, some had to shut down. I had three clients shift careers because the business just shut. They couldn't do anything. But then they recreated themselves, and now a year later, they can go live anywhere they want. They're making the income that they want, and they're enjoying life. And it's like, it's that moment. And I always take it back to the breath. I take it back to meditation, right? Because it doesn't let you get distracted. I mean, I still have my father, but I know when that day comes, God willing, it's going to be a day that's going to really make me reflect on me as the man I am and the person I am. And it's going to really rattle me. But at the same token, I'm not the same person I was like 10, 15 years ago. I look at it now and be like, was his, it's their journey. But at the same token, I'm going to appreciate all the memories and soak up all that I had. And I know they're not gone, depending on what your spiritual beliefs are. I know mine is that they're in a different dimension. They're still here, just in a different dimension. We just can't see them. And so it's like, then I know they're still here. It's just a different relationship now, but it's a closer one. And I learned that through my grandfather's death over 10 years ago. His birthday is on 9/11. And so it's one of the things where, knowing when he passed, I was like, I had to learn a different relationship with that. And it was kind of interesting. But before we wrap up, I know we're cutting time here, but I want to be able to have people, how they can follow you, how can they get your book, On a Wing and a Prayer, and all that good stuff.
Sure. All my details are on my website, kushalchoksi.com, my first name and last name.com. And yeah, the book is on Amazon, on Barnes and Nobles. I've tried to encapsulate a brutally honest account of my last 20 years of journeys from 9/11 to, beginning to learn the breath work and what it has done to me over a period of time as part of this book. It's called On a Wing and a Prayer, Spirituality for the Reluctant, the Curious, and the Seeker. And yeah, so
I love that. And for all the listeners, this will be in the show notes and have you to get access to with all the links and so forth. So check that out. Kushal, appreciate having you on. I love your energy. I love the heartfelt energy you bring to the table and sharing that with all our listeners. Thank you for taking the time, and more importantly, thank you for sharing your stories with your dad and then with 9/11 and everything. I know that's some deep stuff, and I appreciate you sharing that, and then appreciate you sharing your message and teaching people the world of breath work and all that good stuff.
Thank you, Vic. There's so much heart in what you do, and I feel it, and appreciate, and I'm grateful for this opportunity to talk to you and your listeners.
Thank you, my friend.